Hello, folks. Welcome back to the program. This is Chris, live in central Pennsylvania. Breaking news out of South Africa, where we just published a video on a few moments ago. This story came out about 3 hours ago now. The Constitutional Court has refused the leave, permission to leave, whatever they call it there. It's a legal term there. So that they basically dismissed the appeal in the Kill the Boer case of hate speech against the EFF and Julius Malema. I'm joined by constitutional advocate Mark Oppenheimer, who discussed this with me as much as he could in the past. We've been waiting, a year, 18 months, I think, to have this conversation again, very patiently, Mark. And it broke today. And I see that the Ronaldo Meister got you on before I did. So much for breaking the story. But let's talk about this in depth. Mark, how are you doing tonight?
Yeah, good. Always a pleasure to be on your show. So I can give you a little bit of an idea about just the procedure. So I ran the trial in Kill the Boer for AfriForum, which was done in the Equality Court. And that trial ran for 9 days. The Equality Court ruled that Kill the Boer does not constitute hate speech. The matter was then taken on appeal. In the appeal, I acted for the Rule of Law Project because there's a concern that different standards are being applied in these hate speech cases, and the Supreme Court of Appeal dismissed the appeal. What then happened was AfriForum asked the Constitutional Court to hear them in an appeal. And what they've done in that leave to appeal process is refused to hear them. So they haven't actually dismissed an appeal. They've just said, there are no further steps. We're not even going to have you appear before court and make any arguments. And so this is the end of the road for that litigation.
Does that mean that it's just done forever? There's no other option? You can't come at a different angle or a different basis in law to go after this? Or what happens next? Nothing?
Well, I think the nature of law is such that things are never, ever over. That a good example would be Roe versus Wade. You had the Supreme Court in America making a definitive decision saying that there is a constitutional right to abortion, and then this is overturned a couple of years ago by the current Supreme Court. So it might very well be the case that the issue arises again and that another court finds differently. Of course, what you have at the moment is, two courts having made a ruling on it. Part of it is that the courts have claimed that Kill the Boer isn't a song about Afrikaners or white people. In fact, what the trial court says is that it is a song aimed at the current regime, in other words, the ANC government, so that when the EFF are singing Kill the Boer, what they actually mean is we have concerns with the ANC. Pretty interesting reading, I suppose. You then have, the SCA sort of taking a view, well, this is political speech that's protected. Of course, what you have to do, and also a claim that, no one knows what a Boer is anymore. Who knows what the Anglo-Boer War was, or, what farmers are, or white people are, any of that stuff. So there's a sort of collective amnesia that seems to have set in. But this judgment must be read in light of the other judgments. So, for example, in Kwalani, the Constitutional Court held that saying, I pray that politicians would have the balls to change those parts of the constitutions that allow a man to marry a man and ditto a woman. That constitutes hate speech. And that case sort of set out all of the norms. We know that almost all public displays of the old South African flag constitute hate speech, but apparently calling for ethnic minorities to be killed at mass rallies by political parties who have the power to do so, under conditions where that ethnic minority gets brutally tortured to death and Kill the Boer is written in blood over people's bodies, well, who knows what Kill the Boer means.
Well, it's absolutely bizarre world. I feel like I'm watching an episode of Superman here in an alternate dimension, alternate universe. So I guess that means that Nobs Mkhize is probably off the hook for, rubbishing colored flight attendants on a Fly South Air flight. Nothing's happened to her thus far. And I'm guessing that our favorite, pretend black man, who apparently is more coy looking with those freckles and that little scruff of hair, that would be Nota Boloye, who said that white women are genetically inferior to black women and that whites are inferior because they're mixed with Neanderthals and that they're canines who should be chained like dogs and treated as such to be trained. And followed that up, of course, by saying that whites should be slaughtered and driven into the ocean. But, of course, he's not going to do that because he's not man enough. I suppose they're off the hook. Nothing's going to happen to them before the Equality Court if this sort of speech is allowed. It sounds like you can say anything that's the most outrageous thing you like against minorities, and there's no consequences in South Africa. Am I missing the beat here?
I mean, that's certainly the signal that's being sent. Maybe there's some kind of argument that Kill the Boer is a special song with a struggle history. By the way, this is a poor argument. This is a song that had basically been abandoned by the ANC. When Malema had sung it in 2010, it was seen as very shocking because it had been sung by Makaba before and was kind of basically denounced. Also, the context in which things sung is not at a recital of, here's a music lesson about the history of struggle songs. Malema himself, sort of when he explains in the testimony what it is, he says this is a call to action. We're directing Nyamazane to go out there and to kill. He says that we're not afraid of killing, we're not afraid of dying, we will bomb the union buildings. I asked him, would you pledge never to slaughter white people, and you refused. So we have a lot of context to get a sense of what the song is actually about. I asked him, what do you understand a Boer to mean? And he said it's a white person. There was sort of a move to say, oh, well, farmers come in all sorts of different races. And he's like, well, Boers certainly don't. So all of that stuff is ignored. What you do have is an interesting situation where the timing of the decision is interesting in that Kill the Boer has been in the international news quite a lot lately. It was sung on Human Rights Day by the EFF. Ronaldo had tweeted about this. This was picked up by Elon Musk, and I think it's been viewed 60 million times.
Correct.
And rebuked by Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State. So the American government is pretty worried about this sort of thing, and they've been denouncing it for a while. To the Constitutional Court, this leave to appeal application has been sitting on their desks for a while now. So it's interesting that the decision is made now to say we're not going to hear it. And that sends two different signals depending on where you're at. The one is to say, American government has nothing to worry about. Our Constitutional Court has certified that there's no problem here. And the other one is to say, you're alone. That the South African courts think that there's a magical exception when it comes to certain groups, and you can get fucked, basically. So that's the signal that's being sent. And then basically you've got the American government saying, okay, well, if that's the way things are, we're going to have to start offering people refugee status. It's pretty clear that the South African government institutionally doesn't care about certain groups of people. That when it says it's a non-racial society that cares about equality, well, that doesn't seem to be the case anymore. It's interesting to see how it's playing out.
Indeed. It's shocking to see what's playing out here. The other side of this, you and I haven't talked about this, I don't think. I can't recall the last time we spoke. We've spoke offline, but I don't think we spoke on air. But maybe January, I can't recall. But a lot has happened since last time we spoke. Of course, we've got the South African government playing the victim here. First off, Donald Trump signed executive order on the 20th of January, suspending foreign aid to the entire planet. And the African National Congress decided that they were going to use this as an opportunity to go, hey, why are you picking on us? Why are you picking on us? And then, they kept running their mouth, and eventually Trump did pick on them by issuing an executive order that suspended aid permanently to South Africa. Since you want attention, you got it. Now, they had a basis for that. This is an issue that's been going on for a long time from a U.S. perspective, and we've been treated like rubbish by the South African government when it comes to our national interests for a long time. So then every time we turn around, Trump is pressuring, Trump is threatening, Trump is sanctioned. There are no sanctions on South Africa. We had a professor from Stellenbosch University come on and on the air on Newsroom Africa and lie about this and say there's sanctions. There are no sanctions on South Africa. In fact, South Africa is illegally in the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act. The abrogation of private property rights under Expropriation Without Compensation Act with nil compensation is a direct violation of U.S. public law, and we are obliged to kick South Africa out of AGOA. But we haven't done it. We haven't done it. There's no sanctions on leaders. There's no tariffs. We put tariffs on Canada. We put tariffs on Mexico, our neighbors. But we put no tariffs in South Africa. You have access to our market duty free. Yet politicians continue to run around and raise the rhetoric. Whether it's Sikalala or it's Fikile Mabalula or Paul Mashatile, or it just goes on and on and on. I surmised 6 weeks ago, I think I was among the first to say this, I think the ANC wants to be sanctioned. I think they want to be the victim here because this can't be accidental. They can't be that stupid. This is yet another insult. As you said, for my audience, the court didn't have to hear this case. It's like the U.S. Supreme Court. They pick and choose the cases they hear. And they can only hear so many couple dozen cases per year. And they pick them usually based on a constitutional role, because it's constitutional court, to make sure that a key issue is in accord with the Constitution. The fact that they decided to rule on this today is shocking from a geopolitical standpoint. It's, to me, yet another poke in the eye to the Trump administration. They want sanctions. And don't hold your breath, because they might be coming soon.
Yeah, I mean, the famous Julius phrase, I'm not calling for the slaughter of whites, at least for now.
Now, yes, exactly.
And yeah, it's no sanctions, at least for now. I mean, as you say, I take the view, if something seems irrational, you need to think a little bit harder. And I think that many ANC officials are acting perfectly rationally, which is if you understand that they have no interest in protecting South Africans, no interest in ensuring that the poor are treated well, no interest in any kind of broad South African project, but they have a very narrow interest in their own livelihoods, then it makes total sense. It's actively sever your relationship with America, get closer to Russia, China, Iran, and if you think about ZANU-PF in Zim, the guys at the top levels did well for themselves. Drove Bentleys, lived in mansions. I mean, the medical sector had entirely collapsed, but that's okay. You fly to Singapore and you get your treatment done there. And it's that narrow interest that the ANC officials appear to be operating under. So all that you can do then is to affect them narrowly, which is that if sanctions are to be introduced, they should be heavily targeted sanctions. They should be put on no-fly lists. They should be told that they are persona non grata, just like Mr. Rasool.
Mr. Rasool. Yeah, I started a verb when that happened. I said, "You've been Rasooled." Yeah, so so I take credit for that. Not exactly original, but look, I mean, that's the argument I've been making, Mark, now for about 6 weeks. This isn't just nonsense. This is intentional. They want this, and you go right to my argument. The ANC doesn't exist for South Africans, certainly not for poor black South Africans. They've tripled the number of black South Africans living in abject poverty from the apartheid era. 3 times many black South Africans live in abject poverty as did then. They've lowered the educational standards. People said Bantu education was poor. Okay, fair argument. For most black South Africans it was, and Indians and coloreds. But today's ANC Bantu education is demonstrably worse than any education under the National Party. 30%, 30%, 30%, and 40% in your first language. And then the likes of Nota Boloye insulting me. My first language is English, telling me he speaks English more better than I do. I guess he does. There you go. More better than I do. No, but look, I mean, the ANC exists for cadres. For the 550,000 cadres. That's who they exist for their patronage network. And they don't care if the whole building burns down as long as they have their walls, their fiber, their blue light escorts, and their privilege, and they're treated like they're somebody special. I mean, remember when the July insurrection happened in 2021 and Cyril Ramaphosa ignored it for 4 days, completely ignored it. I predicted it on June 29th, by the way, but he completely ignored it for 4 days. And then he shows up in a 8 motorcade BMW 8 Series luxury cars at a burnt out shopping mall in a $10,000 suit with an expensive watch on, and grabs a spade and shovels 2 shovels of burnt products into a wheelie bin, smiles and walks away. These people don't care about the poor. They've never cared about the poor. And if you think the MK care about the poor, you're delusional, or EFF. These people are just opportunists. It's heartbreaking. But I mean, okay, Mark, I'll let you respond to that. And then I've got a real serious question for you about something beyond this.
So you're right to point out the cadre deployment problem. Here's something really heartbreaking. So you're Judge Zondo. You run the State Capture Commission for 4 years. You dedicate your sort of twilight years to this project. You produce a report which details all of the sins of the ANC, and you highlight cadre deployment as one of the chief sins. You say cadre deployment is unconstitutional and is at the core of this project of theft from the South Africans. So AfriForum and the DA go to court and they say we'd like the ANC's cadre deployment policy declared unconstitutional. Zondo says it's unconstitutional for the government to ever listen to the ANC on this. It's pretty clear. What does the court say? Absolutely not. No problem at all here. Cadre deployment policy is fine. And for daring to ask for us to rule on this, even though this is a matter of the public interest, obviously, and the general rule on that is that, if you're unsuccessful, you're not in for the costs. They hold the DA liable for the costs of 5 council who are employed by the ANC and all the others, ministers and what else. And they said to AfriForum, yeah, you're a friend of the court, so we'll let you go lucky this time. But we were this close to holding you liable for costs. So, that sort of meant to send a signal, which is,
shut up.
Shut up.
Shut up.
Don't ask questions. Don't try and go after corrupt people. It's a problem.
Which goes exactly to the point that I've been making all along, which people have completely ignored. I've said this in written articles I've written about for the past several years. I've said it over and over in my program. Expropriation without compensation is not about the land. That's a red herring. Expropriation without compensation, as defined in Section 25 of the Constitution, property is not limited to land. It's stocks, it's bonds, it's jewelry, it's buckies, it's apartments, it's all property that you own. And that will be used as a tool to silence critics of the government by whatever the government of the day is in the future. This is truly Orwellian, and virtually no analyst has talked about this. This is frightening. No government should have that sort of authority to take your property without compensation. Section 25 of the Constitution makes it very clear that it must be for a public purpose, in the public interest, just and equitable compensation. And what has been going on here and what's happening now is all about political pressure to silence political opponents. I guarantee that's what it's about. What's your take on that?
Chris, I'm just shocked that you would say something like that. Not my ANC. No, they would only do things that are in the public interest. I mean, of course, it's complete fucking lunacy is what it is. You empower not just the national government, but 400 expropriating bodies.
Right. It's the national, provincial, and municipal level authorities can take your property.
Yeah. Okay. So, yeah, it's... The way the act is drawn is so that expropriation can happen to all property. The without compensation bit says land. It's unclear whether stuff that is seized to the land.
Right.
So your house on the land might very well count. And we know that's what the constitutional amendment envisages because it said land and improvements. So that's an argument that that's what would be aimed at. But the point is, some municipal official says, well, we're taking your stuff. What are you going to do about it? You're going to have to take me to court to fight me. Oh, you don't have any money because I just took all your stuff. Of course it's going to be used to punish political opponents. It's going to be used for all sorts of petty squabbles. You're going to have some municipal official who says, I saw the way you looked at my wife in church the other day. I think we're going to have to confiscate your stuff for the public good. I think you're going to have like huge internecine factions as well. So one of the things that's kind of amusing about this, one of the cases that's spelled out for when you don't have to pay a cent is land held by the state where they received it in a bequest. So what you can have is municipalities got some park that they're arguably not using efficiently, and so the national government says we're taking your park. Or the University of Cape Town has a whole bunch of land that sprawls up on Table Mountain, which they're not using for educational purposes. It was given to them by Assessor John Rhodes. City of Cape Town says, actually, we think we're going to build some housing over there. You're in CCT, that stuff belongs to us. You're an organ of state. So you can just imagine the government fighting with itself to the death, which is semi-amusing. But yeah, given that you now have a panoply of different political parties, once MK start getting municipal power in KZN in the next election, they're going to be grabbing stuff left, right, and center, saying, oh, well, this is held by people in the ANC. The people who who betrayed the glorious movement and, requires us as the vanguard, the true ANC, the real fighters to kind of like take it back for the people. So, yeah, it's going to be an absolute, and this is a legal term, shit show.
Okay, well, I guess I am an advocate then. I do use that term, shit show. I also use the Charlie Foxtrot. You probably heard that one before from the military. But look, I mean, but this is really, the danger is this spirals out of control. The people that think they control this, Mugabe lost control very quickly in 2000 when he thought he had control of events, and they spiraled out. And he even found himself in a corner, even though he was the instigator of what was going on there. But this can very quickly spiral out of control. We've already seen, despite the lies of the government, we've seen land grabs in Seshego and Polokwane. I mean, even the SABC reported on it, honestly, about people just claiming land and laying out staking stuff. And then they didn't report on it again. They probably got the message from on high, don't report on this. Then we've seen land grabs near East London, at Fort Jackson, Northwest. And now what we're seeing today is people purportedly members of the EFF rocking up at businesses and demanding that people, pay them because they don't have a license. They're going to be fined, threatening to call the police on them for a business that's been in business for over 30 years. The guy has a license and then fraudulently claiming that people are hiring illegal aliens to work. I saw a video from police earlier, which it has to violate the Poppy Act. I can't believe it's even legitimate for police to record an arrest of people and post it on social media. And at the same time, police officer calling one of the people being arrested, here, look at him. Look at this criminal. Okay, first, you haven't been convicted. So you're not a criminal. Look at this criminal here. He's hiring illegals. He's a racist. How are you a racist by hiring illegal aliens? I mean, that doesn't make any sense. The stupidity of this, the violations of law, they're so clear and evident. But of course, they have no fear because they won't be prosecuted. Look, I mean, this can spiral very quickly. And I think it is in some places already spiraling out of control.
Well, here's an interesting feature of South African law. If you are born outside of South Africa, so you're from Zambia, let's say, you don't count as black on our law. So there's a sense in which the xenophobia is sort of like driven by a legal structure, because those people who are seen as outsiders are those that are white and those that are born, outside of South Africa on the rest of the continent. Now, of course, if you're a black person from the rest of the continent during xenophobic attacks, people get burnt alive. I mean, the levels of violence perpetrated against, vulnerable individuals who've come here to make a better life is just like truly horrific. The necklacings, the sort of brutal beatings to death, these sorts of things. Either the state, cheers it on in a sort of vote-grabbing effort, or turns a blind eye to the violence. But yeah, it's truly disturbing.
Well, it's just a matter of time here before foreign direct investment says to hell with this. I mean, look, Microsoft and Google and Amazon, Microsoft and Google can go there. There's very little overhead. They don't build factories. They're not doing industrial production. Their overhead's pretty light. They just pack up and leave overnight, and then we'll miss a beat. But Caterpillar, Ford, General Motors, these companies aren't going to invest money in South Africa. We've seen a lot of foreign, in fact, all the stock market value that poured into South Africa and raised in the Johannesburg Stock Exchange over the past, since 2014, is all evaporated since Ramaphosa has become president. The man who promised to bring $100 billion of foreign direct investment to South Africa. I mean, the courts are a mess. Policing's a mess. There's no electricity. The roads are a disaster. South Africans don't drive on the left or the right. They drive on what's left of the road. This nonsense of being harassed by the EFF, people showing up, people staking claims to your land, and there's no recourse. This is insanity. This is a failed state. I mean, you don't have to comment on that, but I'm telling you, this is a failed state, and I'm heartbroken. There's no need for this. There's no need for this whatsoever. Proper macroeconomic policies would have driven investment, would have driven production, would have driven growth of over 6% annually. Instead, South Africa is limping along at 0.8%, falling behind inflation. People are becoming poorer by the hour in South Africa. It's really heartbreaking, Mark.
It's truly heartbreaking. And I think one of the things that's heartbreaking about it is that you look at where South Africa is, you look at the potential that's here, the simple changes that could be made, and then you go and compare us to other developing countries. So I was in Vietnam recently. Now, Vietnam, devastated by war, by, a communist government, really made some bad choices. But in 89, they say, you know what, we're going to have some free market reforms. Okay, and so they allow for companies to list on the public stock exchange. Still quite a regulated, controlled place. But you've basically had growth just do this, and so you got a place like Da Nang, which in most people's minds is just a site of the, of the war with America, and it looks like Miami. You've got incredible skyscrapers and high-class restaurants, and things are affordable and amazing. And I mean, one of the guys there, said, well, the tax in Vietnam is quite heavy. We pay about 20%, and so we said, we pay about 45%. He said, wow, healthcare in South Africa must be incredible then. Of course, we burst out laughing. I mean, healthcare in South Africa in the private sector is pretty great, but not for the public sector. So we have really high taxes. The stuff that you'd expect your tax money to go towards, like, I don't know, running water, no, roads, fuck off, electricity, dream on, But the private sector works. So you basically get like doubly taxed, because then you got to pay for all those things yourself. You got to have private police. You got to pave your own roads. You got to go and build your own private schools. But there's a point in time in which people say, I'm being squeezed on both ends, and I can build a better life for myself elsewhere. And it really is sad because you've got a nation with so much potential. I mean, there's a reason why you come out of South Africa, Chris, and you have a ball here, and you say South Africans are amazing. There's all this beautiful stuff. There's like this great potential, and we're being choked by a really sinister government that has done everything possible to Charlie Foxtrot us right in the butthole.
Well, in fact, and the European Union, the African Union, until recently the United States, were all complicit in this by looking the other way as these things came into play. Really, this demise began at least 15 years ago. There was a chance for a good start here, but it all began to fall apart with the departure of Mbeki. I'm not a fan of Thabo Mbeki. He's a weak-minded, weak-willed individual and is responsible for the death of 500,000 people, in my view, but we'll stop there. But I'm saying that it all really began to fall apart after he left with the assumption of Zuma, and it's just gotten worse under Cyril Ramaphosa, the so-called, businessman who isn't a businessman. When people give you equity stakes, it doesn't make you a brilliant businessman. It just makes you good at getting patronage. Look, go back to the Asian thing. So we go back to 1960, the beginning of the independence era. There were a few states, Sudan and Ghana, that became independent before that in Africa. But 1960 is really the big starting point for the independence movements in Asia and Africa. Most Asian countries were abysmally poor, far worse off than African countries, and they inherited none of the infrastructure that some of these African countries had, although, the Francophone countries were really in bad shape. The French didn't do much there, but the Anglophone countries weren't as bad. They had a lot of educated, middle-class people, and they had institutions. But the Asian countries had almost none of that. Now look at Malaysia today. Look at Vietnam. Look at Singapore. Look at South Korea. Look at Taiwan, which grew from nothing after fleeing from the communists in 1949 to Formosa. There is clearly something wrong here, and it's not neocolonialism. It's not Western racism. It's not imperialism. There is a cultural and there's a political problem in these countries in Africa that retard their growth. We've seen this, and people have been warned. Mzee Julius Nyerere in Tanzania went on a communist path. He went to socialism. He created big collective farms. He socialized everything, and it was a complete disaster. To his credit, after trying it for 20 years, he's like, this didn't work. He left office, putting the country on the right track to more of a, not that it's a free market economy, but it got on that path. And Tanzania began to recover. When he told Mugabe in 1980, he said, don't make my mistake. Don't chase the whites out. Don't go to socialism. It doesn't work. But look what happens. Look what happens. This is every path we go. Even Botswana now has a socialist government. Of course, that's because they're all angry at Eric Masisi. They just wanted him gone. So, but that's what you get. It doesn't look like they're behaving socialist. But the Asian tigers are Asian tigers, despite all the complaints that Africans make. It's time for Africans to start taking responsibility for their own mess. They created this mess. It isn't outside intervention. We've given you billions and trillions of dollars and helped you build infrastructure, which you pissed down the drain all over the continent. I'm hot full of this at this point, to be honest.
Yeah, you can sort of understand why the Trump government says, hold on a second, all that money that we've sent to Africa, what's it being used for? Is like, are we getting bang for a buck? Are we at least getting loyalty? Are we at least getting a South African government that says, you know what, we have a good trade relationship with you, like, you're our second biggest trading partner. Hundreds of thousands of jobs are at stake. We might not like you, but we'll play ball. No. What do you have the South African government do? Spit in their face over and over and over again. And kind of get away with it. And in some senses, like if you're the kid who's managed to get away and spitting in the teacher's face for 30 years, and now a new teacher comes in and says, what the fuck are you up to? Like, that's unacceptable conduct. You're running litigation against my greatest ally in the Middle East, in Israel. You're telling Trump that he's a fascist white supremacist, as the ambassador to the country, and as many other ANC officials. Like, we're not really endearing this relationship. You can on the one hand say, like, we're quite concerned with ensuring that our relationship works well, but also don't trust these racist colonial pigs. We really have to learn a lesson here and start behaving ourselves.
Well, before I let you go, I just want to share this with you, and you can comment if you want. You don't have to. The relationship with the United States is incredibly beneficial to South Africa in so many ways. $8.1 billion to fight HIV over the past 22 years, and what was supposed to be a 5-year temporary program to help countries get on the correct footing, and we continued it for 22 years. the trade relationship is actually more beneficial than the Chinese, because the Chinese are buying raw materials and sending you their finished goods, and you're not sending your goods to China for the most part. Whereas the U.S. buys automobiles, automobile parts, and you work up the benefication, the value chain, and that all stays in South Africa and enriches and employs more people in the product chain as you spread out. In addition to that, the United States has sponsored South Africa to get the IMF and World Bank loans because they're the biggest vote share, and those banks and those institutions are headquartered in Washington, D.C. And so many other ways we help South Africa against gender-based violence, with trade things, so many things we've done to help South Africa. And this is what we get in return. Well, here's the thing. If Trump's refugee program goes through, which it will, if people actually take him up on the offer, which some will, if the numbers that have expressed interest actually do, South Africa will be devastated. Human capital and farm productivity and business productivity will eviscerate and destroy this country. Mark, 67,042 heads of household, just go with an average family size of 4. Turn their names into South African Chamber of Commerce, USA, which isn't even involved in this. They have nothing to do with it. And they told people to stop sending them emails after 3 or 4 days, and they still got 67,000 names. They've given that list to the embassy, which they probably won't do anything with other than make a database of it. Then the Amerikaners group that formed of some Americans, naturalized South Africans here and a few South Africans there to help people figure out what it's like to live in the States. They just turned a list into the embassy of 27,000 more names. I know from people who've been interviewed at the embassy that the representatives from the Bureau of PRM, Population, Refugees, and Migration, have told them they got over 30,000 emails to the embassy, even though they didn't solicit them 2 weeks ago. So we're talking 130,000 names roughly just from those 3 sources. And of course, you and I both know, neither one of us are Afrikaners, but we both know that Afrikaners are incredibly suspicious and they don't trust anything by and large. So a lot of them haven't even expressed any interest or even gotten involved in this. But that's 130,000, average family size of 4. That's 500,000 people already out of 2.8 million white Afrikaners. And who knows if it's going to be extended, and I think it should and probably will be extended to ethnic minorities. We could throw in another 1.3 million Indians that'd be eligible, 6 to 8 million coloreds, and this could get really ugly. And people are like, well, America doesn't have the absorptive capacity. Trust me, we do. It's a big country, a lot of space. We spend $3 billion a year funding refugee resettlement once you arrive in the States for employment services, medical, financial assistance, all that stuff. So everything is being done on that side to rubbish this concept. Oh, you'll live in FEMA tents. They're all racist. They'll hate you. But you're white. Why would they hate you? Anyway, but you get the point. So my point here is that this, if the ANC doesn't stop this, could be the end of South Africa in many ways.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of, what would it look like? What would South Africa look like if, the EFF got their dream and said, we drove the whites into the sea, they've got on their ships and they've gone back to where they came from, the land of the free.
Well, they didn't come from here, so they came to a new destination. This is the great.
Yeah, Malungus are all the same to me. You're all a bunch of
okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
Well, look, before you finish that thought, the Minister of the Presidency, Kumbutsu Ntshavheni, just rubbished and with disdain the claim that 70,000 commercial farmers are going. There aren't 70,000 commercial farmers. She don't have the ability to say South Africans, vice, anyway, it's this. Anyway, sorry, go ahead and finish your thought. It's, ugh.
But I mean, like a real number that sort of seems like an easy one to just go would be there's about 20,000 agricultural workers who already go to America on short-term work. So they do like 3 or 4 months of the year and they rotate. So those guys know what it's like to work in America, would now have a path to citizenship. And would say, well, I know there's a job waiting for me. I know how to do this work. I've got friends there. You lose 20,000 people overnight. That's quite a big deal. And what would it look like? I mean, you think about Idi Amin sort of kicking out Indians in Uganda. What happens if you kick out everyone who's a racial minority in South Africa? Well, your tax base disappears overnight. I mean, what is it? 1 in 30 people pay 85% of the taxes?
Correct.
Okay. So, people leave with their clothes on their backs, but their businesses aren't going to operate anymore. You'll have ruined the nature of your nation, so no one's going to want to invest. You'll have achieved equality because everyone will be equally fucked, But I'm not sure that's a real solace.
Yeah, that's not solace. That's just a disaster. So I've just put the email in for the embassy folks. I wasn't advocating people send it there, but since my government has been reticent to answer questions, and I've had to answer these questions 376,000 times over the past 7 weeks, I hope you dump on their server. They deserve it. By the way, they finally came out with a list of frequently asked questions, all of which I was 100% correct on. They did it 6 weeks after I did it, within 3 days of when this thing was first announced. But yeah, so that's up there, folks. All that does is send an email to the embassy saying you're interested. That is not the refugee program. It does not exist. There is no application. You can go do all the research, list whoever you want. But until the United States government issues the program and lists the publication of what is necessary, it's all speculation. It's informed speculation, and when really speculation, it's analysis on my part, but most people are speculating. So you could send a message there to them and tell them, hey, I'm interested. I'm a South African. You might want to throw a few lines in. I was discriminated in this way. This is what happened to me. I had someone write to me recently and tell me as a toddler they were raped by someone of a different race and never told their parents. The person is in her 60s now, still living with the trauma of that. The person was raped because they were white. As a toddler. Well, not a toddler, but a small child, I should say. Not even in school yet, and remembers it vividly. I mean, this sort of. So, if you've got a horrific story, you might want to tell, but that's your decision. Anyway, Mark, we could talk for hours on this, and I know you've got other things to do, so I don't want to be inconsiderate and take your time. But you do recognize I've waited 18 months to have this conversation because we've been talking about this for a long time.
Yeah, and I'm glad we finally got to have the chat, and it's been full and frank. Yeah, I'm always happy to be on the show.
Well, it's great to have you. Folks, if you're looking for where to find Mark on social media, about the only place you'll find him of any substance or consistency is in Brain in a Vat. The links are below the video, and I've gotten better at making sure they're in the video before we actually talk. Because when we first few times I had him on a few years ago, I didn't even know he had the channel when I first did it. Poor research on my part. But those links are there so you can check it out. Mark, as always, give my guests any final words or thoughts about this. What comes next, if anything? I mean, before you answer that, I think it's time for a third country to take a novel approach, kind of like the Gambia did in 2018, by for the first time ever taking another country to the International Court of Justice for genocide that wasn't occurring in the Gambia. They didn't have a dispute between the Gambia and Myanmar, but they took Myanmar to the court for the Rohingya. Well, I think it's, by the way, the ANC didn't join that case as an amicus brief or a friend of the court. They just stayed out. They're so concerned about genocide. They've took in genocideers from Rwanda. They didn't join the Gambia case against Myanmar. They say nothing about Tigray. They say nothing about Sudan. List goes on and on. But I'm saying maybe a third party, I don't know, Estonia or Finland, maybe they might want to go to the ICJ and charge South Africa with its failure to uphold the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which they're a signatory to, and not protect human rights. I'm just saying. Anyway, you get the stage. Final thoughts, Mark. You can answer that if you want or not, or whatever you want to say about what the next step is, if there is any.
Yeah, well, I will say that the South African government has a very unusual approach to international law, and had threatened to withdraw from the ICJ. When there were calls for it to arrest
the ICC.
ICC, yeah, you're right. Yeah. Our approach to these international tribunals is sort of haphazard. Brain in a Vat, by the way, it's a philosophy discussion show. Lots of fun things we've done over the last 5 years. There's also a Mark Oppenheimer channel on YouTube that has a list of all my interviews and court appearances and things like that. So more in line with the sort of discussion we've had today. But if you like weird and wonderful philosophical conversations, we've had some of the brightest minds from all over the world.
Oh, sorry about that. My microphone was acting up there. Well, Mark, thanks a lot. It's always a pleasure. Folks, go check out his content. It makes you think. It's interesting. I'll say that. No doubt about it. So, all right. Well, I don't know. I'm not in South Africa, so I can't lay any charges against any of these people. So it's up to somebody else. I'll leave it at that. All right, Mark. Have a good evening. Thanks a lot for your time. All right, folks, Mark Oppenheimer, advocate for the High Court, the Apex Court there, the Constitutional Court. Let him drop off there. There he goes. All right, cool. Thanks for coming in, Mark. I really appreciate you being here. Folks, thanks for being here. There were some super chats. Let me address those very quickly, and thank you all for that. I do appreciate it, but yeah, as you can understand, I was focused on the conversation with Mark. So Dave Dugans became a member. Jean Verifia became a member. Mercurcia Alazlu, wow, that's an interesting name. became a member. Thank you. Van became a member. Thank you. Ronaldo's here. Brilliant chat. USA needs to start showing South Africa where we rank according to their interests. We aren't as important as ANC think we are, says Ronaldo, 35 Rand. Thank you for that, Ronaldo. By the way, Ronaldo, I caught a little bit of your conversation with Mark. I didn't catch all of it, so I hope we didn't overlap with our analysis or questions here. Andrea Shea gave $5 saying thanks for the great convo. And Bergmeister gave 70. Awesome broadcast as always, Colonel and Mark. Thank you. Thank you all for that very much. I do appreciate that. And you can also go catch Mark's conversation with Ronaldo from his live broadcast earlier, a couple hours ago. I think he came on while I was still live. You can check that. So can this case be taken to international court? Well, potentially it could, Quentin, from the perspective I came up with. The Gambia in 2018 took a very unique approach. No one had ever... See, the International Court of Justice, I didn't want to keep Mark any longer because he's got a lot going on. But the International Court of Justice is established by the United Nations, by international treaty, so that states can take each other for disputes. There have been 3 disputes that come to mind that have had big impact or bearing on the ICJ. In Botswana, Sududu Island, which sits in the Chobe River, was disputed between Namibia and Botswana. Both countries agreed to go to the International Court of Justice. They heard the case, the tribunal. They decided in favor of Botswana. Sududu Island belongs to Botswana. Namibia accepted the result. Nigeria and Cameroon had a dispute over the Bokassa Peninsula. And the Bokassa Peninsula, which is the Anglophone part of what is now Cameroon, when the rest of the country is Francophone. But the dispute was settled in favor of Cameroon, and that Anglophone portion was given to Cameroon. So that's the second case. The third case that comes to mind with the ICJ is the South China Sea and the Nine-Dash Line, the fictional fairy tale of the Chinese communists claiming that is their waters. It's not. It belongs in international waters, the Scarborough Shoals, the Spratly Islands, and so on. That is in the Paracel Islands. That's international waters, not Chinese maneuver. And they claim it is. And so they have ignored the ICJ ruling that said that they have no legal claim to that area. And they've continued to build their fake islands in the middle of destroying the ecology of the reefs out there for their naval bases, threatening Vietnamese and Philippine shipping and ramming into Philippine ships and things like that. So they're a malevolent actor in that region. So that's 3 cases. So another party could come along and go to the ICJ and try something novel like the Gambia did with a genocide case against Myanmar, even though no Gambians were affected by it. That wasn't Myanmar attacking Gambia or a territorial dispute, but they took them. And that case went there. It was groundbreaking. And that's the basis for the South African case against Israel. So I think that some other actor might want to consider, or maybe they will, taking South Africa to court over this issue. Not protecting human rights, not protecting minorities. These are grievous, grievous offenses in the minds of the international community. At least they always have been when they were people of color. Will they defend people who are pale? We shall see. Thanks to my guest, Mark Oppenheimer. Thanks to everybody being here. Be sure to hit the like button and stay tuned. I just published one video. I got another one about to come out in just a couple minutes. It's already loaded and waiting for me to release it or edit it, and then we'll have it out there. I've got 3 more, but I'm not going to be able to get to them today. I've got other things to do. Thanks for your patronage. We'll catch you guys a little bit later. Watch the videos. Thanks, Mark. And there you have it, folks. The hate speech case is dismissed. It's not taken up by the Constitutional Court, and therefore the lower court ruling stands that Julius Malema can sing hateful songs to kill the Boer. Shocking, to say the very least. Ani, thank you for your membership.